Welcome to Complinet Global Newscasts. News featured is taken from Complinet Complete, our news, analysis and tracking service, and your comprehensive view of the regulatory landscape. A working group composed of the heads of the major regulatory agencies has issued a report detailing potential new rules for money market funds. The rules, which would supplement regulations issued last year by the SEC, include measures to extend regulation to offshore and other unregulated money markets, to regulate money market funds as special purpose banks subject to FDIC regulations and protection, and to establish a privately funded emergency liquidity facility to aid failing funds. The policy options discussed in the report will be referred to the new Financial Stability Oversight Council for review. We spoke to Scott McCleskey, our managing editor in New York, about the report.
The vulnerability of money market funds in a crisis was one of the big but largely overlooked lessons of 2008. So I think it's good that they want to bolster regulation in this regard. But the SEC already issued rules last year to address many of these issues, and given the central role of these funds in overnight funding, I think the regulators need to be very careful about tinkering with the system. The one thing that does make sense to me is the idea of a privately funded emergency liquidity facility, since this is a variation on the government support that saved the market in 2008. In other words, it's the one thing that we know works.
A UK insurance broker has received a record jail sentence for making corrupt payments overseas. Julian Messant, a broker of London-based PWS, was sentenced to 21 months imprisonment at Southwark Crown Court after pleading guilty to making or authorising corrupt payments of almost $2 million to Costa Rican officials in state insurer INS and the National Electricity and Telecommunications provider ICE. We are now joined by Complinet's Alex Davidson. Alex, what kind of message does this send out to the industry about making corrupt payments?
This is a very powerful message to the industry against making corrupt payments overseas. We're talking here of a 21-month jail sentence, a record jail sentence for overseas payments made by UK people as opposed to domestic payments. And we're also noticing here that the SFO, the Serious Fraud Office, is carrying on making plea bargains with people despite setbacks, as in the Dougal case earlier this year, which it's had in the past on plea bargains. So this is the SFO is sending out a very strong message here.
What do firms now need to be doing to protect themselves, and how are compliance officers concerned?
We're now right ahead of the Bribery Act, which is coming out in April, and basically corporate prosecutions are going to be easier then, and the onus will be on firms to have systems and controls properly in place. So firms should be doing everything they can to get checks and balances in place now. And most importantly of all, there should be a compliance culture from the top down. It is now, more than any time in the past, no longer possible to rely on the poor compliance people to do absolutely everything. The compliance people are not going to do everything, they're not going to carry the can. There's got to be a compliance culture now right throughout the organisation, from the top management down, and that is part of the Department of Justice guidelines, which are currently under consultation in relation to the Bribery Act coming up.
Thank you, Alex. The US Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control has blacklisted 2 Afghan narcotics traffickers operating in Helmand and Kandahar provinces who provided financial and logistical support to the Taliban. OFAC designated them as specially designated global terrorists. Both Haji Aga Jan Alizé and Saleh Mohammed Katkar are dangerous individuals whose operations pose a grave threat to efforts to stabilise Afghanistan, said Stuart Levy, Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. Today's action, building on the President's identification of Alizé as a drug kingpin in June, is aimed at further disrupting the financial networks of these individuals who are fueling the insurgency in Afghanistan. And finally, the Financial Action Task Force has reaffirmed its blacklisting of Iran and North Korea, as well as setting out a raft of countries that have committed to working with it to improve their AML and CFT frameworks. The FATF has renewed its calls for members to apply countermeasures against Iran, saying that there were substantial money laundering and terrorist financing risks emanating from the jurisdiction. Iran currently has the dubious distinction of being the only jurisdiction in the top category of the FATF's new three-tier blacklist. The agency said that Iran had taken steps to engage with the FATF, but had failed to meaningfully address the ongoing and substantial deficiencies in its AML-CFT framework. It has called on Iran to criminalise terrorist financing and put in place a suspicious transaction reporting system. The FATF reaffirms its call on members and urges all jurisdictions to advise their financial institutions to give special attention to business relationships and transactions with Iran, including Iranian companies and financial institutions, the FATF said. To read about these or any other stories from Complinet in more depth, please log into complinet.com or contact us if you would like a free trial. Join us next week for another newscast from the Complinet Global News team.